Charlie, thank you very much for being on the podcast today. Appreciate your time. For those who don't know
Thank you.
Charlie Ginzburg, and given you're from the US, I imagine there's a few listening in the UK probably don't know who you are, but they'll know who you work for. Who are you? What's your story through recruitment?
Sure. Yeah, I think probably people in the UK know the companies I work for better than those in the US. So I've been in recruitment for 15 years now. Started at S3, which is a much bigger deal in the UK than it is here. But I started at S3. I was one of the first members of our Chicago office and did IT recruitment within the banking and financial services sector. And was there for 5 years, and I've been at Michael Page now for 9.
Awesome. And how did you get into recruitment? Because the classic line I always hear is, oh, I didn't mean for it to happen. I fell into it, right? What's your story?
That is the truth. I was a cigarette salesman when I first started out of college. So I worked for the company that makes Marlboro cigarettes, and it was a good job, but I wanted something that was more merit-based and, more tied to the inputs I put in. And someone I knew had gone into recruitment and recommended I take a look at it. And that's how it happened. I never imagined myself as a recruiter. I think most people don't.
No one wakes up at 18 years old and goes, my future is recruitment. Well, very, very
Yeah,
few do, but it seems to happen with everybody in this industry. It's bizarre. And what
always.
drew you towards, I've got to ask the big companies in this case, what drew you towards S3 and then onwards towards Michael Page? Is never like a desire to go to a smaller, more local firm?
It's a fair question. The honest answer is that's the company I got introduced to and things sounded good there. But, big firm offered the opportunity to have a stable company with a lot of resources, but I was part of a startup. I was the sixth employee of S3 in Chicago. And when I came to Page, we had 17 people only in this office. So I've actually had the benefit of being part of a startup within an established company, which I think actually gives you
Awesome. And then obviously now 9 years on from joining Michael Page, you've gone from starting out as director to being the managing director for Chicago and LA. What does a typical day look like for you?
typical day.
Mm.
No day's the same, which is such a cliche answer. I would like for more of my day to be in front of clients, but I think I try and actually stay as close to the business as I can. I think when you're in a senior role, you can get drawn into meetings about marketing and back office strategies and things like that actually don't really impact your customers and your people in as much of a way as sitting with them and being with them. So this morning I was in a team meeting and going through the pipeline and what's going on, and then sat with someone talking to them about a deal they're closing. And even though that's not my main role and responsibilities, I try and do more of that than actually the ivory tower. Let's look at a lot of spreadsheets and KPIs. But my main focus is people. I'm not as client facing as I was 10 years ago, but I have 120 people and I think of myself as having 120 clients. And so my day should be revolved around how do I make those people happy and engaged, just like a salesperson is thinking, how do I get that client to keep buying from me? My job is to think, how do I get these people to keep working for me and selling for me? So everything I do is around their happiness and their development.
The 120 people that you manage now, and obviously that's quite an expansive team from when you joined at 17 or so. What does that structure look like? Like you got a layer of managers under you, I assume. Like how many
I
are
do,
there?
yeah. So in my Chicago office, we've got about 80 people, managers at various levels, manager, senior manager, director, right? So I've got 3 director level, few associate director, senior manager below that, managers below that. I think 5 to 1 is the ratio I like to go for in terms of consultant to manager, because we hire a lot of people that are at the more junior end of their career. And so the opportunity to spend time with them, coach them, develop them into future leaders is really what our job's all about.
Got it. And this will probably lead us very nicely into this next topic, to be fair, or the first one we've got, which is around the difference between big recruitment versus small recruitment. Yeah, we've got various clients who say, we don't hire any juniors. We only look to hire seniors now. So our team's very focused. It's small, it's powerful. Whereas others say, kind of like what you're saying there, the pipeline does start at the junior level. So obviously we can explore that a little bit further as well. And you can share some of your thoughts around this.
Sure.
What do you see as the big difference between big recruitment and small recruitment primarily?
I think the biggest difference is, well, there's a lot of big differences. I think small recruitment, especially when it comes to probably the typical British recruitment company that comes into the US, everything is designed around when they're going to exit. Like every conversation is about the exit and the exit. And I think when the whole business is designed around an exit, then the motivators of the business and the decisions you're making are tied to that. And when you work for a big publicly traded company, it's not built around an exit. there's pros and cons of both. Obviously, a publicly traded company, right, reports earnings quarterly, right, and has to deliver certain numbers, right? So there's pressures that come with that. But I think that's one of the big differences. The other is the amount of resources that you can, provide, the type of career you want to have. I think small companies are often really good for big billers. They offer attractive commission schemes, not as many resources, not as much spent on benefits and things like that. But if you just want to bill and take home a big chunk of that billing, then oftentimes small companies have an attractive proposal. I think large companies, especially ones like Michael Page, are the best place to go if you want to build a career, in particular, a career as a leader, building out a team and scaling a team, because you have resources and you're not under the pressure of, well, we're a startup but we don't have cash flow. So I can invest and hire a team that's going to lose money for 12 months, knowing it will make me money 3 years down the line. And a small company oftentimes can't do that.
Yeah. More playing for the long term than the short term. And you kind of answered the question before I was going to ask it, what is the main driver that you salespeople on reasons to come to Michael Page? Because like you said, it's not there's an exit that you're finally lining up towards, or it's not like there's a big company you get to expand with. It's a big company in what it is. Is the main reason you sell people, it's about that purpose and that career creation long term for them? Is that the reason why people come to you?
Building a career is definitely, I think, the biggest one. And I mentioned junior people. I don't hire grads, actually. So I hire people at all different levels of all different experiences, but people that want to be developed and coached is one of the main criterias. If someone's looking to just come in and do their own thing, I actually don't think Michael Page is the best company for you. I think someone who wants to build a career but also get coaching and development along the way is. And then there's a whole variety of career paths you can go down when you're part of a large company like Page, which you can't often do in a startup. And so you can get exposure to a lot of different things. So yeah, career growth is the number one. I actually think the comp is comparable, right? Like small companies will sell on, a certain number, but I think good people get paid well everywhere, including here.
If you can sell and you can make the company money, you get paid well for it.
Yeah,
Rocket
if
science.
I didn't pay my people well, they wouldn't stay. But
Exactly.
I think that's often the, you know, misunderstanding or the sell of small companies.
Yeah, which then leads to a real big question. It's kind of the real core of the issue is why does big rec generally get a bad name? Because those who have been at places like S3, like yourself, will always have great stories about the building years when contract books are flying and things are going really, really well. But the overall sentiment, I think, is that larger PLCs are slower moving. It can be, you can get stuffed inside of a corporate environment. Why do you think it gets a bad name? And I guess equally, why do you disagree?
Yeah, I think if someone gives it a bad name, it's because they often failed at the big company. And so it's easy to point at that. Not everyone who's left, right, failed. I don't mean it like in a bitter way, but I think it's an easy thing to point to. Big companies are different than small companies in recruitment and insurance and tech and anything, right? Big companies do have more red tape and are probably a bit slower to make decisions, but oftentimes that isn't a bad thing. And so I don't necessarily think they get a good name or a bad name. I think that it's just a different model and a different approach. Yeah, you can be really nimble at a big company. And the offices I run, we get a fair amount of autonomy to make decisions from every aspect of the business. And there's probably some decisions I don't get to make because, my name's not Michael Page. But the decisions that matter in terms of paying my people, delivering to my clients, strategy of the business we go after and the candidates we go after, we can operate like a small company in terms of the nimbleness there. So I think if a big company gets a bad rep, it's because they don't give enough freedom and autonomy to their leaders to operate properly.
Yeah, to operate like a business within a business almost, I suppose, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. And we spoke a bit about this when we first actually got introduced as well, like the mistakes that you see people make when they leap from a big company to trying to set up their own thing and then realize, oh God, all this infrastructure that supported me in my previous role is not here. Like, what the hell do I do? What are the big mistakes or assumptions that you see people making when they go from a place like Michael Page or an S3 or anywhere and try and do their own thing?
Definitely. And I don't want this to be about like, oh, everyone who goes to a small company sucks, right? There's some really
Plenty of
successful,
great ones.
very
Yeah.
smart people who do that. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of people that do that. I think sometimes people get a false sense of how easy things can be at a big company. I'm fortunate. I work for a company with a really large brand. We get business called into us all the time. If I started my own company tomorrow, I would not have that. So I think actually numbers are inflated. If you can, a 400K biller at a small company would be a 5 or 600K biller here, in my opinion, because you have clients that come to you, you have more existing business, and there's a massive team around you that can fill your jobs and pull jobs that you fill. And I think sometimes people just don't realize that when you go off to a small company, that support of working on a team where you're not doing every job on your own independently is it's a lot harder without that.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, like, like you said, there's always been many that have been very, very successful, but I think it's those that realize, like, you need to have some kind of unique edge over what you had before. It's like, it's all good. You've got to go and rebuild all the structure and the operations that acts the company you're in before. If you're going to do it by yourself, there needs to be something you know. And one of those big things is knowing the niche that you're going into, being able to offer really specialist guided knowledge. That's kind of the second thing that you and I said we speak about was discipline within your niche, right? Many will say, oh, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm focusing on this niche. That's all well and good until they realize they can't quite pay the bills as quickly as they need
That's
and
right.
therefore start spreading the market. And then it really starts to sting them. But even at a larger, more stable company like Michael Page, you're really hot on like knowing your niche and being disciplined within it. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I actually think it's the simplest but most important thing in recruitment. It's not a crazy concept to say, pick one thing and stick to it. But actually having the discipline to stick with it is so hard. And even for people who are good at it, if you're having a bad month or there's a bit of pressure from someone above you, whether you're at a small company and it's because we have to pay bills, or whether you're at a large company and it's because you have to hit some budget, a new shiny job comes in that's outside your core market, but it's like, oh, I could fill it because every recruiter thinks
There's
they could
plenty of
fill
great
every job.
ones. Yeah.
And the analogy I use with people is just kind of like, well, eating burgers every day in the moment is much more fun. Eating salad is way more boring. But if you eat salad every day for a year and you eat burgers every day for a year, right, you're going to look back and you'll be much happier with your decisions. But in the short term, it is hard to have the discipline to eat a boring salad every day. And actually, a lot of business, I think, is who is willing to eat the boring salad every day and not chase the short term wins. And not just because of external pressure, but also internal. You hire a new person, especially if I hire an experienced biller. Well, they have imposter syndrome when they first come in, or they want to prove that they were worth the salary we paid them. And so they want to get some quick wins, sign a quick contract, do a quick deal. And I'd rather them do 0 deals for the first 3 or 6 months, but build a business properly, doing the boring stuff, adding the right context, coding the system well, all the stuff that doesn't get praise or shout outs or get you to lunch clubs, but actually builds a real business. And I just think everyone would agree with that in a room on a conversation like this, but very few really have the rigor to do it on a daily basis.
Well, let's dig into that a bit because it's a really interesting topic. Like, I can think of when I first started this business of One Up, like, I was told so often, oh, know your niche, know your niche, know your niche. And I was like, it's all good saying that. And knowing it is one thing, but and then sticking to it, like you say, and having the discipline is another. How do you make sure your team stay focused on it when, like you say, they might come to some months when the market is really hard, when they haven't got any placements coming in? How do you ensure they don't just go, oh, but just one placement over here and I'll be all right for my number this month? How do you get them to stay relentlessly focused on it?
Yeah, it's a lot of work from the leadership, because if not, people will just chase the shiny thing or go after low hanging fruit. And so you have to be consistent in your message. And that's hard to stay consistent because it's very easy if revenue is great and the pipeline's good to say, hey, we can be patient, right? We can lose money on this market for a bit and be patient. If you had a bad month, it's a lot harder to then say to someone, it's okay if we have another bad month because we're building for the long term. And
Yeah.
I'm not perfect at that, but you have to have consistency top to bottom, which means I need my boss to know what our plan is so that he doesn't call someone below me and say, how come you had a bad month? And I need the people below you. You need everyone in line on that. And you have to continue to talk about it and reinforce it and audit the activity and check on it. But it is hard. Someone came up to me last week and was like, oh, we pulled this job and we got an interview out and it's this huge fee. And then my first instant reaction is like, oh, it'd be great to get this big fee. And I sit back and think, and it's like, well, why did we even work that job and get an interview there? Because that's outside of our core. But it is hard to say to someone, stop doing that. Because
Yeah,
they're
just
like, I can make
say no
money
to that
there.
commission that looks like it's probably going to come in, right?
Yeah, but the best recruiters in our business say no way more than they say yes.
And do you have like a level of tolerance where like you accept that sometimes that will happen and say, look, okay, like this sounds okay, but it's not going to be the standard, like close it and then leave it? Or do you just say outright, no, we're not doing it?
I think for most of my teams, I'm pretty strict on saying no. I think for really tenured individual contributor billers, you get the opportunity to focus more on the commitment of the client versus the role that they give you. So when you're on the more junior end or you're a part of a team, it's actually about, does the role fit into the core that this team does? Because if I pull this job that everyone on the team is sourcing candidates for, I will deliver on it faster. And it's the same type of job we've worked last month, 6 months ago, 12 months from now. So all the work we do, even if we don't fill this job, will be good for the next one. And so you measure or score the job based on that. If you are an individual contributor and a tenured biller, I would actually measure it much more on the commitment of the client, because actually there are billers that probably could fill most jobs because they do know how to market map and sell and recruit. And so it's more about, is the client really committed? Because if I'm going to spend my time on only a couple searches this month, I need to know that the proper commitment is there with a retainer or things like that. And so I'd score it differently for a more senior or tenured.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And you kind of mentioned this earlier on. It's like, when you've got managers, leaders breathing down your neck saying, okay, well, where's the revenue coming from? It's all well and good saying, well, hey, it's part of the plan that we agreed. Like, I'm focusing on my niche. Like, it's going to take time to build out. At what point do you find that kind of acceptable line of saying, look, actually, this is now someone that isn't performing the way that we need to, and we need to have this conversation, versus accepting they are building out a niche and it's going to take time? Like, at what point do you say enough's enough?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? How do
Ain't
you
it just?
know?
That's what I'm trying to get the answer out of your head. Yeah.
I think part of it is what you've given people as what you want them to do. So, before we launch a new market, we will spend 3 months adding contacts, adding leads, posting jobs, building a database. And so actually the KPIs I will celebrate and measure someone on are those things. And so you have to kind of create, all right, this is our goal for this. Now the next 3 months, it's all right, let's get contracts signed. Placements are not right. Let's get agreements signed out in the market. Let's build our number of conversations. And so you have to decide what you're measuring people on and stick with that. As far as when to know to pull the plug on someone, I am a very patient person if you are three things for me. So you have to be hardworking, which doesn't mean working 12 hours a day, but it does mean being efficient with your time and being structured and not leaving because the clock has hit a certain time, but leaving because you've accomplished the day's tasks. You have to be coachable, which doesn't just mean you take feedback, but it means you can apply it. Even if you are really behind, even if you need a lot of coaching, as long as you show you can respond to coaching, I can work with that. And the last is your attitude. You get told no so much more than you get told yes. You have to have the attitude of resilience. You have to focus on why you are someone, but what you can control in that situation versus blaming others, because it's so easy to blame the market or other things or all that. And frankly, you just have to not be an asshole. I really don't have a lot of patience for that. I fired number 3 biller in our office last year because he was an asshole. So if you can be those 3 things, then our commitment is we can work with you, right? And we'll be really, really patient. So to answer your question, I would ask someone that, right? When managers come to me and they have someone on their team whose revenue maybe is behind where they want it to be, we don't talk about their revenue actually. We go through, do we think they work hard? Are they coachable? Do they have the right attitude? The answer is yes to all those things. Then we've done something wrong in terms of how we're training them or coaching them or supporting them. If the answer is no to one of those things, we have to address that.
Makes total sense when you put it that simply, doesn't it? You mentioned that coaching piece and all that actually as well, which is a really interesting one, because I think what you were getting at is, a big mistake that a bunch of people make with coaching is someone can hear you and say, yep, got it. I'll go and apply that. And then they don't apply it. Whereas some will apply it. And of course, you'll then see the fruits of that labor. They'll begin to progress and you'll see things develop onwards and outwards. It definitely is a mistake I've seen a number of times where people think this person's really, they're coachable because they listen and then think they'll be okay in the long run. And often they aren't, because it goes in one ear realistically
Yes.
and straight out the other, even though the response is positive.
Yeah, people think coaching means they don't push back on the coaching and they're open to coaching. That's half of it. Half of it is, can they apply it? So you have to give coaching, ask them if they understand it, and then see if they can apply it, right? By actually sitting and listening to calls. And, I'm a big believer in sitting next to your people and listening to their calls and actually hearing that they applied the talk track you gave them or the approach you gave them. And they need to observe you do it as well as you observe them do it. And you can role play it and you can do it live, but you have to see that they're able to apply that, because that's what really coaching is. To your point is can they apply and take the feedback? And if they can't, you can try giving it in a different way. I'm a big believer in not having one person have only one direct report, for example, because if I have only one direct report and I give them coaching and they're not applying it, how do I know it's not because my feedback is bad or my coaching is bad? If I have 3 people and I give them all the same coaching and feedback, and 2 of them are able to show improvement from my coaching and 1 doesn't, I can eliminate the variable that it's my style, and it
Yeah,
helps me understand what to do next.
it makes sense. And you're starting to get into the nitty gritty of managing there, which brings me on to our third topic, which is around micromanaging. Now, when we first spoke about this, you said a really interesting line, which was like, I like micromanaging. And I was like, now that's a very interesting soundbite to be able to take away from it. But as we discussed at the time, it needs a little bit of context. When you say you like micromanaging, what do you mean by that?
Sure, yeah, so we obviously will have to clarify or else, we'll go viral for that quote.
LinkedIn will kill
But
you for it.
yeah. So I think micromanaging is like following someone to the bathroom, right? Like micromanaging is asking someone like, where were you for the last, 10 minutes? Structure is what I mean. I believe people crave more structure than they typically get. I think most people actually can take a breath and relax if they're shown versus putting all the pressure on them of you figure this out. And I like to use a lot of analogies. I like to use a lot of food analogies. I don't know why, but I always ask people when I hire them, ask them their favorite restaurant and ask them the dish they get there. And oftentimes people have a restaurant where they get the same dish every time there. And I ask them, does it taste the same every time? And they say, yeah, of course, right? The steak here tastes identical every time. So I say, if you got hired there as a chef, it would never say, great, our best dish is the filet. Make it however you want. They'd say, no, make it exactly fucking this way and don't change a thing because we know that works. And so when I hire people, I say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you exactly how to be successful. And then after a while, if you were at that restaurant and you've worked there for a few years, you say, hey, I want to try a new dish and I want to try some different things. Probably would be able to do that and get that autonomy because you understand the frameworks and there's a sense of understanding on both sides. But when you first start, I am going to give you structure. And I think you want it actually. I think most people that join, it's like, do you want me to show you how to be really successful? And if so, I will do that. And so I believe in structure. I believe people want structure and crave structure. And if that's not something people want, then they're not a fit for me. And I actually think you have to do that at every level because you get someone who goes from, recruitment consultant to senior consultant to managing consultant, then they become a manager. And at that point, they'd earned a lot of trust and freedom and autonomy from their manager in terms of how they operate. But actually, they now need a lot of structure in terms of how to be a manager. So you have to almost think of them as a rookie again and give them the full framework of how to manage. And so I really believe in giving people more structure and more coaching. And then you have to get a feel for, does it seem like what I'm doing is unnecessary because this person is getting it and fully autonomous and doing these things. So now I can move on to level 2 and help them with being more strategic and mushrooming accounts and being going up the food chain within their clients and things like that. But I am a big believer in structure, and I think it's what has made our business really successful.
It's really interesting because a common like startup fallacy that you hear is, hire great people and get out of their way is what you often hear is the line, right? Whereas it's almost like it's the opposite. You need to be close at the start and be able to make sure, look, here's how things work. Here's how we do things. Here's what we know historically has been successful for us. Then over
Hire great
time, you
people and
give more
spend a lot of
trust.
time with them.
Yeah, rather than going the reverse of like, being very hands off and then suddenly getting hands on when things aren't quite going the way that you wanted it to. It's almost the reverse of what common mantra teaches you, right?
That's right. And I think the structure changes, right? So I just hired a really senior individual who's built more into his career than half the office combined, probably, right? A really senior individual. So I'm not showing that person how to make a cold call. And I'm not telling them how to approach all their things. But actually, in my mind, if I spend the most time with that person, the ROI on that is way higher than potentially someone who's come right out of college. But what we're talking about is just different. We're talking about how to leverage our client base and their knowledge and how to really make the most of their skills. But if I go 3-4 days without talking to that person, they might veer slightly off the track where I think we can be most successful. And I find that actually the best people really like a partner in the strategy, right? So what they don't want is me asking them what they're doing every 5 minutes. What they don't want is me saying, I'm going to listen in on all your calls and I want to be CC'd on every send out you do. That would be crazy. But I would do that for a brand new person. I'd say CC me on your send outs and let me listen to your calls so I can help you. But with individuals like that, you're giving them structure, but it's in a different way. And I think you should hire good people. And my job is to get things out of the way from those people. So get stresses out of their way, get things that are keeping them from being successful. But I try and spend all my time with my best people.
It's another classic thing as well, as like you can spend all your time trying to save the ones that aren't at the level that you need, or you try and find a way to push the ones that are best that bit further forward. And there's always typically more ROI, as you sort of referenced there, and spending more time with someone who's got that experience and has been successful historically to make sure they are the same for you. I guess it's a way that then spins off that is, how do you avoid, I mean, I guess it's more of a case where you spoke to someone and said, look, here's how we work, here's the structure we put in place. And they go, yep, sounds good. They come and start working for you, and then they go, well, you're getting too involved here. Like, this doesn't feel good. I'm sure that's probably happened once or twice, right? Like, how have you dealt with that?
It happens less than you think, given I just said I'm really hands-on and structured.
Yeah.
I think it's all about setting expectation up front. I'm really, really honest with people when I interview them of what we are and what we're not and how we manage. And actually, if someone interviews with me and then decides they don't want to work for me after because I was really honest about how we are, then I think that's a good thing, because it
100%.
means we weren't going to be a fit for each other. But yeah, if someone feels like you are just breathing down their neck and doing that thing, then you probably need to take an assessment of what are you trying to accomplish by spending time. Oftentimes people who micromanage are doing it for their own sense of security. So they're checking in because they want to feel like they're doing something. Or they want to feel like it's like, oh, if I just ask every hour about the forecast, it means I'm doing something here. So you need to do a bit of a sense check of like, is this for me or is this for them? And sometimes I will say to someone, I want this info for me, right? This is a meeting for me where you're going to report things to me. And sometimes I say, this is a meeting for you where it's about how can I help you? And if you get that pushback, I think you're probably doing more for you than for them. And so understanding how you can add value to them. And if you are spending an hour with them every day, what's the way that you could spend that hour so they feel like they left better at their job or more equipped to be successful versus I just got a bunch of info that I probably could have pulled from the CRM. Because I think half of the catch-ups people do with people are asking for, a forecast meeting. Is like crazy, actually, because if someone updates stuff in the system, you could just look at what their forecast is. So let's have a meeting to talk about how we can make more money from that forecast, as opposed to you just reading me every line and I could see myself. So again, that's micromanagement, is just asking the questions that probably are for you. Structure and strategy is what I try and focus on.
It makes total sense as well. I have to ask the question while we're in the area as well, given what we do as a company. Data, CRM information, like you say, how do you use it to coach and guide people? Like, to what extent are you digging into the numbers to really understand what's going well or what's not? What are you doing day to day with that?
Yeah, I'm really big on auditing data and looking at the quality and quantity of what people do, because you can give a lot of coaching. People can work hard and make 50 calls in a day, but actually it was the wrong 50 people to call, or it was the right 50 people to call, but they said the wrong thing on those calls. And so actually looking at the content of what people are putting out, who they're calling, the quality of the notes they're putting in there, the codes they're putting in, such basic stuff. If you talk to a candidate and you code them properly, well, then in 6 months, I'll find them much easier. So I look at a lot of boring stuff like that to know that we're building the business right, because actually those are the inputs that will get the end result.
Mm.
So I think, I personally think that the CRM is not what makes the recruiter. Good recruiters could recruit off of Microsoft Excel and be almost as successful. A good CRM will help you organize your data. It will probably help you be a bit more targeted when you're approaching candidates and clients. It will help you, leverage previous conversations, et cetera, right? Like, and that's all important. But I remember when we were at S3 and we went from whatever we were on to Salesforce, and the pitch was like, oh, productivity goes up 20% for the average company that adapts Salesforce. It's such bullshit. It's a good CRM. It does good stuff, but actually, if you're doing the job properly, I don't think the technology is the difference maker. Although I'm a big believer in using it right, predictive analytics, and and coding contacts and candidates properly. Those are all good, but I don't think the CRM is what makes the recruit.
I agree. And I'm very, very curious to see, without getting into that classic topic that we always seem to, I'm very curious to see how AI transforms that landscape, because I've always been big on saying we don't hire, good recruitment consultants in the day are meant to be good people, then have them spend 75% of their day staring at a CRM or a bit of technology and entering admin and changing fields. And that's not what we hire them for. We hire them to be people. And so the future hopefully leans us more towards a world where that is less of a differentiator and more of a just a standard that comes in and it's done for you. So they can spend time being people. That's what I'm really excited to see, at least anyway. What are your thoughts on where the future goes?
Yeah, I agree. I think AI is amazing, and the things that it can do are pretty incredible. And we're probably just scratching the surface of it. In recruitment, I think I've seen it help, shorten the time of mundane tasks. Creating adverts or emails or things like that, you can cut it from 20 minutes to 5 minutes. That's all great. I think where Michael Pages use it really well, as I mentioned, predictive analytics, right? So looking at, all right, well, typically this company hires this time of year, and every year for the last 3 years, they've hired in February. So can you alert me in January that we should be calling them? And also, here's 10 of their direct competitors that are on the same product life cycle as them. And so you should probably be calling those 10 companies in January as well. And that is where you can bring intelligence in so that actually you can be more efficient with who you're calling and why,
Mm.
and actually providing some insight as to you're calling these 10 people because every year for the last 3 they've hired someone in February. And so when you're on the call with them, you can actually talk about those things, or looking at, where trends are of who's leaving what companies and going to different places and using those insights, I think is really get big. If you're building out a new market or market mapping, AI is obviously excellent for that, right? It can just save you hours and hours of. And so I think it's great, right? We have a, Copilot and different agents we use internally. I think it's great. I have not seen a bad recruiter become a great recruiter because of it. And so I think it just helps great recruiters be a little greater, and hopefully it continues to do that.
It elevates those at the top rather than so much saves those at the bottom, which is what it should be, I think, anyway.
I think that's right.
Yeah, spot on. And then we come on to like a fourth topic, which you're going to be mentioned before, was a really interesting one. It's one that you added on actually at the back end of our initial chat, which is around big billers versus people managers, and can a business prioritize both? Is one more critical than the other? I'll let you kind of say your piece here as well, because it was a really interesting topic that I'm just keen to hear your thoughts on.
I'd also be interested to hear yours. I think it's in some ways that's sometimes the difference between small and big companies, right? Like I think a lot of smaller recruitment companies don't necessarily get so many careers built in managing people. And so oftentimes it becomes, big company is a great spot to do that. Small company isn't. But I think it can be a conflict at places. I remember after I left S3, they brought in a new CEO for North America. The quote I had heard that this individual had told people was that individual contributors were like terrorists within your organization, right? Because you become held hostage by them. Because when someone's
Interesting.
such a big biller that they make you $1 million a year, you aren't going to push back on them doing things the wrong way. They're not coding in the CRM. They're not sticking to a core market. They're not joining the team meetings, or they're not doing whatever. What are you going to do? Fire the person who's billed $1 million? But then all your standards slip, right? And people start to be like, well, that person does the job this way or doesn't do these things or all that. And so although I think that's a bit of an extreme way of doing it, I do understand why some companies get caught up in catering to that. At the same time, $1 million billers are really, really valuable. And so for me, the answer is I really want to build a place where people can have a career in both. And in my business, you can make just as much money being an individual contributor as you can running a team of 50 people. And I want you to choose the path that you're taking, not because one makes you more money, but because it's actually aligned with your career motivations and your goals. But
Mm.
it is hard because if you spend all your time focusing on the individual contributor, then you probably are out of balance. And if you spend all your time focusing on people managers, you're also out of balance. And so it's not an easy answer. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that as well. My goal is to really create a place that both can thrive and succeed without one conflicting with the other.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts over the years, a really interesting challenge I've observed is you get a lot of good ICs who kind of feel like the only natural path is to go down management, right? And the thing that I always stress to anyone who's ever said to me, like, I'd really become a manager one day, it's a really good book, which I think is like it's like the making of a manager. And it was by a woman who worked at Facebook and went down that path of going from being a really, really skilled and capable IC towards being a manager, and then saw others make that jump. And she was observing all the failings and the things that were seeing these people who were really successful individual contributors just collapsed once they became managers because the skill sets are so different. And I think maybe where there's real work to do is to always make sure someone is extremely clear on, look, I know you feel like that is the only path for you. In recruitment, obviously it's not. If you can bill $1 million a year, you're walking away very, very happy and likely making more money than most managers are anyway. It's like, are you really after this for the progression because you want to be a leader of a business one day? Or is money the real driver that you've got here? And it's completely okay to want to be an expert at your craft as an IC versus feeling like you have to walk this path for promotion. And that's something I think companies can do a much better job of doing. And at the same time, as you sort of referenced, is knowing that you need to have both. And it sounds so obvious. Obviously you do, because you can never, you as a managing director or as a founder might be the most passionate, like capable recruiter in the world. You need to be able to pass on your skills and your knowledge to others. They can pass it on to others as well. Otherwise, you are the bottleneck to your business scaling. And I think that's where a lot of small companies get stuck, is they focus so much on big billers. They don't look at who are the excellent managers that I can hand off to here to give my skills and my insights to see them echo it across the rest of the organization, to build it from 17 to 120 people. And that's where they can get stuck in that sort of 15 to 30 range and not really kick on beyond that point, if you get me.
I totally agree. Understanding that actually the number of people you have that can be managers is kind of the currency you have as a leader in terms of if you can scale or not. Because uh, if you can develop someone into a manager, well, they have the potential of managing 5, 10, 15, 20 people. So the investment in this person is actually investment in a future 15. But if I spend all my time with managers and I take all the managers out to dinners and I only celebrate the managers, then individual contributors either wouldn't want to stay, or they think they need to go into management because that's how you get FaceTime with the
Exactly.
boss or that. And on the flip side, if you only reward the individual contributors and it's like, oh, the big billers are who we celebrate, we take out, and they get the emails all the time. Well, then someone says, well, that's what I want to be. And so you have to create a reward structure, a support structure, a career structure for both that are complementary but different. And striking that balance, I think, isn't always easy. I think we've been really lucky in recent years to find a good balance on that. But I do think that is the thing that hurts small companies that are trying to scale, is it's just built around individual contributors. And you have to have them, but you also have to have processes that are scalable.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are conflicting.
Way I've often heard it put is like an IC, if you're really passionate about projects or your craft, doing things, then stay as an IC. If you're really motivated and purpose driven by developing people and seeing them grow, and that's what gives you fuel, energy, and drive, then yeah, explore being a manager, right? And I think it's being honest, I think, in the individual themselves and you helping them come to that point of clarity to realize, what is it I'm really driven by? Or is it just I like the idea of the prestige of being a manager, like you say? But your point there towards saying make sure the individuals are recognized, the way that we do that internally is when we have our awards that we give out throughout the year, they are only ever allowed to be given to individual contributors for that exact reason. Like the managers get recognition in other ways, right? They've had that step up in the role, they're managing people, they feel like they're becoming more senior, but making sure that the recognition is given to those who are the ICs, I think is so important. Just to say, maybe management isn't for you, but knowing that what you're doing is still immensely useful and you're not some pawn in a game here, like it's not all about the managers, I think is really, really important. So I'm totally there with you on that front.
Yeah, totally agree. They're both so important. Sometimes it's as
Almost
simple
like
as
speaking
just
about the obvious in a way, aren't we? Yeah, you
yeah.
do
It's
need both.
sometimes I think it's as simple as just having more conversations and listening. We've been through a journey in here over the last 10 years of needing to just actually sit with a group of people and ask them what they want and how we can better support them and how they feel they're valued or measured. And you have to do that with managers and you have to do that with ICs. And you actually have to create different structure for both.
That's the big question here as well, because obviously there's a step beyond manager people can go into, which is leadership, right? And obviously my share of managers over the years that were good managers, they really cared about their team, they were really involved, but can never quite make that step towards leadership, where their concern becomes less about the people they oversee and it's more about the leaders as a group and their collective goals of achieving for the company, right? What have you seen as the big sort of fall downs where managers maybe haven't quite been able to make that step up? And what was it that was blocking them along that journey?
In terms of becoming a manager of a small team to maybe a director of multiple teams.
Yeah, or becoming like a leader of the business in general, where your attention more looks upwards, more strategic than it is strictly like operational and day to day.
Yeah, I think you're right in identifying that that is a struggle for people. I think in recruitment, you go through so many journeys, right? As an individual contributor, you're in a very quote unquote selfish role. Not in a negative way, but your job is to maximize your time, make the most money. If you go into management, you're suddenly gone from a selfish role to a selfless role. And that's a bit of a mind fuck because the way that you were successful is not the way you're going to be successful.
Yep.
And then as a manager, right, your job is kind of monthly or quarterly activity, KPIs, revenue, tenure, retention, hiring, etc. And then the next step up when you're thinking about going from thinking in months or quarters to thinking in years, it's like three separate jobs. And so you're almost weeding people out at every level. The chance that
That's it.
someone is good at being a biller and good at being a manager and good at being director is like, are you good at basketball, baseball, and soccer?
Yeah,
And so if
exactly.
you,
You're that gifted a
that's why
sportsman, right?
there's less. So I think that's oftentimes the struggle is it's like one skill set is not directly translatable to the next job. And so being good as a manager doesn't make you good as a director always. And being good as a biller doesn't make you good as a manager.
And I guess at
And so I
every step
haven't
of
really
that,
answered your question, but I think that's why
I'm more,
it's
I'm more
hard.
just curious. Like, if you look at each step of those trying to go to that next level, and you know, like deep inside, this person just does not have that capability to make the step up, but they're really passionate about it. How do you navigate that kind of conversation? Because it's never an easy one to say to someone, I don't think you've got what it takes to make that step up. That can lead to people leaving. It can lead to things falling apart. It can be a really tough, like make or break moment for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, I think early in my career, I probably was too black and white around that and, would write someone off too early if it was just like, well, they're not going to be able to ever get to the next level, right? And so we need to find people that will. My manager is big on talking about what's your superpower, and I've really learned from him on identifying like, all right, well, the conversation you suggested, you are talking to an individual who has been a high achiever because they've made it to a certain point in their career. So they care, they probably work hard, right? Those things I mentioned before, work ethic, coachability, attitude, right? They probably demonstrated that for years and years. So they haven't suddenly become shit. There's just maybe some blind spots or some fatal flaws that prevent them from getting to the next level. And so instead of managing them out of the business, how can we help them play to their strengths as opposed to beating them up about their weaknesses? And so finding a ways to use their superpower and also say, all right, well, you're great at this, but this is a thing you're not great at. So can I pair you up with someone and you can complement each other really well? And I've seen that work by thinking creatively about how to utilize someone's skill set a lot over the last few years. And I think, you see someone, right, sometimes being managed out of an organization and they go to another company and they're super successful. And it's like, well, how could we have not found a way to use that, right? Like we knew that they were smart and hardworking. They didn't fit perfectly in this box here. So we pushed them out. I think that's wrong. I think you got to think creatively about at a certain level, what are you good at and how can I find a way to utilize that here, whether that's a role I know about or a role I'm going to create.
Do love the whole superpower thing, by the way. Like our old non-exec that we used to have on our board, Ollie Sharp, his name was. He always came in and day one was saying to all the teams to really try and understand them better. What's your superpower? What is it that you're uniquely gifted at that you're really good at amongst other things? Obviously, what's the number one thing? And it led to some really interesting conversations with certain individuals who maybe were a little bit low on confidence and didn't really know, if they fit the mold, as it were, as to what would look strong. But it led people kind of realizing, you know what, I don't have to fit a mold here as long as it's something I'm very, very good at and I can leverage that to be unique. And then, like you sort of said, work with a team that have got other strengths. The way that you put it was like, if you look to like the Avengers, you don't want 6 Hulks, you don't want 6 Captain Americas, you want one of each to really fit in that team. And that's how a
Yes.
team plays to each other's strengths.
I think that's a great analogy. And
You'll start
it's,
rolling that out on all your future meetings now. That's it.
that's right. But it's true. Everyone has to play a role and you can't have everyone play the same one. But oftentimes, especially at corporations, it's just kind of, it's you go up the ladder and it's like, well, you have to be this in this role and you have to be this in this role. And the more you can actually just think, well, our business is people, right? If you're a software company, it's a product and things are very black and white, right? Like inputs, outputs. If the product does this, it needs to do this. But we're a people business, so we should design everything around people. And so actually, when I interview people, they always ask me like, "Oh, how many people are interviewing for the role I'm interviewing for?" And my answer is always, "I don't hire for a role. I interview people. And if I meet 5 this week I think are excellent, then I'll hire 5. And if I interview 30 people and I don't think any are good, I'll hire 0. But I would rather interview you, find out what you're great at, find out what you want to do, and then go back and think about, can I find a way to utilize that person's skill set? to align
Mm.
with the strategy I have, right? Because I'm not going to suddenly just hire someone to do a different strategy, but can I use what your superpower is and what you want to do in my business? And maybe it's not in the traditional 360 role. And the more that you can be flexible on those things, I think the more you will acquire good talent.
It's more trying to make the box fit to the person than make the person fit to the box, as it were, right? Which I really love the idea of and the concept of. We are coming towards the end of this, though, now. It's been a really, really good chat. Last thing I always love asking is towards the end of these as well. What advice would you give to someone who maybe is at where you were earlier on in your career, right? They've been filling for a while. They're looking to make that step towards management, maybe even have got dreams one day of setting up their own thing and living the ideal lifestyle that I think many have, that a recruitment leader or a recruitment business owner may have. What advice or tips would you give them based on your experiences over the last 15 years and all that you've seen?
My advice would be don't ask so many people for advice. No, I would say there's a couple things that I think are really important. One is we talked about eating the salad every day, right? Like be comfortable eating shit, right? Be comfortable eating the salad every day and make your focus on long term or short term. And actually, if you can just really think about being incrementally better all the time as opposed to great right now and put the patience and the work in, that makes a big difference. Really think about what's in your circle of control and what isn't. And if it's not in your circle of control, don't stress about it because that's poisonous. And so many people get caught up in what someone else is doing or thinking or, this thing that's out of my control. And it's like, if you have the ability to control it or it impacts your career, then give a shit about it. And if you don't, then don't, because the rest is all noise. And when you're in your 20s, it's really easy to spend a lot of time going out and spending the money you get on your commission checks and doing, the things we all like to do in our 20s. But actually, I think if you work your ass off in your 20s, then your 30s are way easier. And too many people wait till their 30s to kind of decide now it's time for me to get my shit together. But now they're married and have a kid, and it's a lot harder to put in the grind. So actually, that would be the best thing to do is really, really, really focus on growing your career as much as possible from 20 to 30. And then actually life becomes a lot easier.
Great advice, I think, for anyone there in any role in any company anywhere as well, which is always really good to hear. But Charlie, that's been an amazing chat. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on and look forward to this one coming out.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for inviting me on.